Good morning, everybody. I'm Cameron Sumner, and this is my project, Gatekeepers and Game Changers, the Rise of Low-Quality Candidates in Senate Races. So last semester I had several classes. Of course, we had the elections going on. I had several classes that discussed, why are certain candidates winning, why are some losing. We're examining elections, and I came into contact with this term, low-quality candidate. I was in one of Dr. Voris's classes, and we discussed this term. And over my previous years here today, back 2022 and 2024 elections, I found out that all four of these men, when they first ran for office, were considered low-quality candidates. And so this research wanted to focus on that term, so I pulled that term out, and it's a big focus of this research. So to start off with, low-quality candidate, let's actually say what it is not. So first of all, a high-quality candidate, according to Squire 1989, a high-quality candidate has the ability to run a competitive campaign. So when we're talking about high quality versus low quality, we're thinking about who can, as a candidate, who can run an election, who can be competitive and who is going to be uncompetitive. So high quality is going to be competitive, low quality is going to be uncompetitive. And traditionally, the literature, the main way one of the main things that we think about when we're thinking of high quality, low quality, who can be competitive, is who has previous political experience, specifically who has previous elected office experience. So basically, a low-quality candidate is somebody who has never held elected office before. They've never been elected to a political office before. And so I found that out last semester, and so my mind's turning on that, thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about these guys in particular. And we got Herschel Walker. He ran for the Senate in the state of Georgia in 2022, a huge race. I'm sure many of you were keeping up with that. Herschel Walker, he's pretty famous in the state of Georgia, a big deal. He lost his race. But then you've got somebody like Dave McCormick over here on the right side. He ran in Pennsylvania in 2022 and 2024. He's also a low-quality candidate. He has a military background, a businessman, not near as well known as somebody like Herschel Walker, but he won his race. So we're seeing a distinction here. We have this group of low-quality candidates who have never held elected office before, but some of them are winning and some of them are losing. So my mind just starts to turn on that, and I wanted to look into these candidates a little bit more. So a little bit more digging shows us that the number of low-quality candidates is increasing, getting up to 60% in the last 3 elections. So over here on the left side, this graph here, this is actually the opposite of a low-quality candidate. These are the percent of challengers with previous elected office experience. So these are considered quality challengers. This graph right here was created by Carrie Eves from the University of Georgia. And what she does is she graphs from 1914 all the way up to 2010. And what we see here is, if you look right here, we see a big jump up to 90%. So in about the mid-1960s, we have 90% of candidates running for office are considered high-quality candidates. But as you can see from there, we have a steady drop all the way to 2010. We have a steady drop right here. And so what I did is I took that. I'm seeing that the number of quality candidates is dropping. So what does that mean? The number of low-quality candidates is increasing. So I took her numbers and I made my own graph to kind of continue her work from 2010 to 2024. And we actually see the number jumps back up to 70%, but then we get an all-time low of 40%. So what I want you to see here is that while the number of quality candidates is decreasing, the number of low-quality candidates is increasing, and we're having high levels. Up to 60% of these candidates are running now. So not only are these candidates running more often, as you see, but also it's arguable that these candidates are having more success. Think about Donald Trump. Remember, he was on my opening slide. He won the presidency as a low-quality candidate, somebody who had never held elected office before. That's a big deal. So these types of candidates need to be looked at a little bit more, which makes us ask the question, what kind of low-quality candidates will you expect to do well in future elections? And of course, that's Vivek Ramaswamy there on the right side of the screen. He is a low-quality candidate himself because he's never held political office before. Of course, he didn't win the Republican primary for president this past time around, but he's actually looking to run in Ohio for the governorship there. So there's our research question. So we're taking that research question. The first thing this research did was we want to look at this term gatekeepers. Gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are the people, the institutions, and the rules that place barriers to entry on the political system. So we've got our political system, and then there are these gatekeepers that keep certain undesirable candidates out. And traditionally they have kept these low-quality candidates out. And this research contends that these gatekeepers have broken down, creating new opportunities for low-quality candidates to have electoral and political success. So something's happened that has caused these gatekeepers to break down, which allows these low-quality candidates to step in and have greater success and run more often. So what has caused these gatekeepers to break down? Since the 1960s, the literature tells us that 3 themes have explained how gatekeepers have broken down. The first theme is right here on the left side, this party as a vehicle. If you look throughout the literature, you can go all the way back to the first established political parties in America. What we find is that political parties have always been used by somebody to achieve an ends, ever since the beginning. I think by the time the 3rd Congress had been established, we had these sort of parties looking to achieve an ends. And what we see is over time is the party is sort of like a vehicle that's meant to be driven. And different people over time will step in and they'll drive the party to achieve their ends. And the big thing that's changed here since the 60s is that groups, outside groups, have actually stepped in and they started driving the party vehicle. And we'll touch more on that in a moment. But that's our first theme in the literature. Our second theme is the loss of trust in political parties. You might think of Watergate. Watergate's a big deal. It's like a watershed moment almost in the loss of trust, the American people's trust in their political parties. But the literature points out 2 more things. As you can see here, I've got a picture of Dr. King here. The first thing is the socio-cultural issues of the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. Kind of centers around the 1960s. What's going on there is we see civil rights and race split the parties. They polarize the parties. So what happens is you got the Democrat Party. They kind of got a big tent. They've got a lot of different groups in there. And race actually causes the Southern Democrats to leave the party. There's an exodus of the Southern Democrats to the Republican Party. So we see the parties ideologically sort, the Democrats liberal, the Republicans conservative. Once that happens, you see a new wave of liberal activists start to take over in the Democrat Party. They sort, and then once they sort, we see them polarize and start to move farther apart. And when that happens, the American people lose trust in their political parties. So that's the first thing that literature points out that has caused the American people to lose trust in their political parties. The second thing is the media, and I don't have much time to touch on this, but this has to do with, specifically in the 90s, radio. We see certain regulations that used to constrain the media, especially the radio, what they could say, how it could be fair and balanced. Those regulations are taken down, and so you see unfettered opinion start to be spread throughout the media, radio, television. Of course, that continues now into our own day with social media. It seems like every day you've got new social media, new ways for people to share information. When this kind of opinion goes unbalanced, unfettered, then people lose trust in their political parties. And the third theme is reform, primarily electoral reform with the McGovern-Fraser reforms in 1972 and campaign finance reform. These 3 themes have caused gatekeepers to break down that used to keep low-quality candidates out of politics. And one more slide here. The big takeaway from these 3 themes is that the parties are now group-centered. But what do I mean by group-centered? Cohen et al., they argue for a group-centered understanding of parties. And get this, that means that it's made up of intense policy demanders, which can include organized interest groups or unorganized ideological activists who make common demands. That's who they say now drives the party vehicle. Schlossman and Rosenfield build on this. They use the term the party blob, which is referring to kind of these para-party groups that kind of surround and buzz around the party, exerting influence on it. So if we take these 2 things together, we've got these groups surrounding the parties, interest groups, we've got unorganized activists. All of these are now driving the party vehicle, they would say. And of course, this is in contrast to the traditional understanding of the party that refers to the party elites, the formal leadership structures of the party regulars. This is in contrast to that. So the party, the traditional party, used to be the source of things like endorsements, finances, and media, but now that's broken down. The traditional party is no longer in control of that. Now it is the groups. And that means low-quality candidates can get these things from other places. They can get these from the groups, which opens up room for these low-quality candidates to step in and have more success. So now turning to our variables that we're going to test in this research. We had 5 variables. These are our independent variables here on the left side. These 5 variables, then we had our dependent variables over here. So what we did is, for each candidate, we took the Senate races from 2010 to 2024, and for each of the candidates that was considered low quality, so for the candidates who never held elected office before, for each of them, we tried to pull out, if the data was there, each of these variables for them. So for outside spending, we expected that a candidate who has a greater amount of outside spending spent on their campaign, so from outside groups, the groups that we just talked about, they would have more success in their campaign, in their race. For personal spending, right here, we thought, this is interesting now, we thought that candidates who spent more of their own money on their campaign would actually have less success. Why? Because that probably means they're not getting the money from the groups that are controlling the party. That probably means they're having to compensate with their own money, which probably means they're not going to be as successful. Media is our third variable. For that one, we took the number of X followers from the time their Twitter followers from the time that they ran for office. And we expected that as that number went up, their success would also go up. And then we also looked at their previous career. For the previous career, we kind of made categories such as celebrity, arts and sciences, different categories. And we expected that those who had sort of a celebrity background, they would do better in elections because they have a following already, they have public speaking skills. We figured they would do better in elections, they had greater success. And then finally, the number of previous attempts. We predicted that candidates who had run for office several times, the more they'd run for office, the more success they would have running again. And we tested all these variables against our dependent variables over here, primarily percent of the vote earned. Why? Because we're looking at challengers in Senate elections. And what is a challenger? A challenger is somebody who runs against an incumbent. If you know anything about elections, you know that challengers typically lose to incumbents. So we don't just want to look at win and loss. We want to look at how much of the vote they're getting. So we also look at win and loss, but primarily look at how much of the vote is this person getting. So those are our variables there. And what we found is that outside spending is the only significant variable. Candidates who receive more outside spending have greater success. This is what makes the difference. If you're going to run for office as a low-quality candidate, this is what's going to make the difference for you. Of course, again, this is 2010 to 2024 in the Senate. So on the left side here, you see this graph. This is outside spending and percent of the vote, the relationship there. So on the bottom, as you go to the right, you've got outside spending increasing. As you go up the left, you've got percent of the vote earned increasing. And you see here, we've got a trend line here in the red, a pretty steady increase. And this represents a moderate to strong positive relationship between outside spending and percent of the vote earned. You receive more outside spending, you earn more of the vote. Over here on the right side, in contrast, this is personal spending and percent of the vote. And there is a slight increase here, but this is actually not true. This is not a significant relationship. This is not what matters. Here are our three other tests. We got the number of previous attempts up here. We see a slight negative relationship there. We've got media right here at the bottom left, a slight, very slight positive relationship. And then we've got our previous career test over here. You see our categories there, celebrity, national security, attorney, so on and so forth. None of these relationships were significant also. And this makes sense as well because, like I said, the parties are now group-centered. Look at these variables: media, number of previous attempts, and previous career. This all has to do with the candidate. Elections are not candidate-centered, they're group-centered. Like I said at the beginning, they're not party-centered, they're not candidate-centered, they're group-centered. So it makes sense that these would not matter like outside spending does from groups. So this supports our history. So in the future, our big takeaway is that we should expect low-quality candidates who have greater levels of outside spending to separate themselves from the rest of the pack. So we've got this group of low-quality candidates. We're seeing them succeed more. We're seeing more of them run. What separates them out from each other? What makes some succeed and some lose? It's outside spending. It's outside spending. And this development is a result of gatekeepers being broken down since the 60s, as we touched on earlier. Primarily, the party is now group-centered, which means that endorsements, finances, and media are no longer controlled by a traditional party. They're also not controlled by candidates. They're controlled by the groups. Thank you. I look forward to taking your questions. I think so. Yeah, they're the ones who are funding these candidates. They're the ones who are predicting their success. I think so. It's no longer the people who've been in government their whole career. What we traditionally think of, traditional party raises up their leaders from the lowest level all the way up as high as they can go. It's not that anymore, so we lack that experience. Now it's these outside groups that are kind of disconnected. So yeah, I think we should see a drop off. Yeah. In quality, yes. Mm-hmm. They wanted there was, at the Chicago convention, there was the big riots. The people wanted a say because Hubert Humphrey, he was nominated in the smoke-filled back rooms. That was not a popular decision. The people wanted somebody else. You had a lot of stuff going on there, and so they actually announced that they were going to do the McGovern-Fraser Commission at that convention to try to please the people. Okay, we'll do this later. We're going to get our guy in right now, but we'll do this later, to try to please the people and say, let's keep all this together. It didn't work. Actually, I'm going to add on to that, but what happened was when they decided to do the McGovern-Fraser Commission, they actually did it later, and the traditional party, so you got the labor unions, that big strength of the Democrat Party, the traditional party, they chose not to participate. And so you see all these liberal activists, the suburban liberals, as some of the literature talks about, they come in, they actually are the ones who control this commission, which gives more power to the people. The research we actually looked at Citizens United specifically. Of course, that's the Supreme Court decision for those who don't know. And the literature talks about that decision, but also Buckley, I think that was in '76. Those decisions, what they actually did was they took legislation from 71, the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 and its amendments in 1974. Those decisions in Citizens United 2010, what it did is the literature says it changed the canals from which the money goes through. So used to, the party was kind of the main funder of the candidates. Now the canal has changed for where the money comes to. That gave more power to outside groups to put money into campaigns. So now the groups are supplying the money instead of the party. That's what kind of changes those Supreme Court decisions made.